Welcome to my channel. I'm John Peters, and this video is part 2 of Concrete Thinking, which is the quickest way to reduce your stress and anxiety. If you haven't yet watched part 1, I suggest that you go do that now, watch that, and then come back and watch part 2. And I'll put a link up here somewhere to part 1 if you want to go watch that. At the end of that, you can come back and watch part 2. But this one is going to be part 2. I'm going to discuss some additional ways to think about why the technique is important and share a very quick and easy way to practice it. Okay, so hopefully you watched part 1 of this Concrete Thinking series, and the link is earlier in the video. If you missed it, just rewind back to the intro and you can see the link up at the top of the screen. But I want to talk a little bit more about how stress happens to us, how we experience it, how we react to it, how it loads up on us, and why this technique is particularly good at being able to counteract the most negative aspects of stress that make us very miserable and that also contribute to that intense stress loading. And there are definite ways to reverse that. So one way to think about stress is that there are 3 different types of stressors. There's lots of ways to kind of carve up what is stress and what is stress management. But from one angle, we're going to consider that there are quick stressors, there are medium stressors, and there are chronic stressors. And an example of a quick stressor is I'm driving down the road and a car pulls out in front of me. Okay, it's quick onset, quick offset. Either I hit the car and we wreck and it's done, or maybe I miss the car and we get out of the way of each other and it's over. The second kind of stressor is called medium, and it's also medium in the sense of time. Let's say I get into an argument with my neighbor about the fact that he was throwing some trash on a shared part of the property. And so we have this argument. It's somewhat quick onset, but the argument might last a little bit. It may not get resolved quickly. I might feel the more intense part of the stress about it for minutes to hours, even to a day or two. But that's the medium type of stress. The third type of stress is chronic stress. Not always with a quick onset where we can pinpoint one specific place and time where it actually begins, but it may just creep up and at some point become prominent enough that we say, yeah, I am stressed about that thing. An example would be working in a job that is a soul-sucking job that you just hate, with a schedule that you hate, different aspects of the job where you don't like the job and you find it very stressful. At some point, the stress of the negative aspects of that job become prominent enough that you decide, yeah, this is stressful. But it's not necessarily a 1 minute to the next quick onset. But the onset is less important than the fact that once it's there, it just sits there. And it is there when you wake up. It's there when you go to sleep. It may even impact your dreams for a lot of people. But a chronic stressor is a very slow wave stressor that has a long time period and is not going to go away quickly. And it's why we use the word light at the end of the tunnel. So you may have used that phrase yourself or heard somebody use that phrase. And what I see the light at the end of the tunnel refers to is this anticipatory relief that we get even before something is resolved, simply because we see the other boundary of where it's likely to end, right? The light at the end of the tunnel. I'm not at the end of the tunnel, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel, which means I have this reasonable anticipation that there's a boundary where the thing is going to end. Therefore, it does not stretch into infinity all the way to the horizon, okay? And that's an important distinction to understand about chronic stress. The first 2 types of stress, the quick stress and the medium type of stress, don't have the end of the tunnel issue because they're going to resolve. The first one very quickly, the second one in a relatively quick manner. And so we don't end up stuck where the light at the end of the tunnel becomes an issue. But with a chronic stressor, where we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, we don't actually perceive that there is an end to the tunnel. And what our brains do with that type of stress is they take it, if you have a percentage of focus, like a pie chart, and you have 0, 1, 2, 3, increasing percentage of the slice of the pie. The first two types of stressors take up a slice of the pie, but not the whole pie. A chronic stressor creeps up until it actually fills in the entire pie. And the problem with that is technically a full pie, because there's one pie, means that it's 100% full. But what our brains do is our brains take 100% and stretch it all the way to the horizon and create infinity. And an infinite amount of stress is an overwhelming amount of stress, which is exactly why when someone, you or I or anybody, when we say, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, we have this anticipatory finishing of the stress, but we have an immediate sense of relief because we're not talking about infinity anymore. We're talking about 100%, but we know it's going to end. Therefore, we're already starting to interact with and perceive with 99%, 98%, 97%. Oh, yeah, I'm approaching the actual end of the tunnel, and I'm going to get out of this. And so basically, in summary, we need for somehow our brains to be able to sit in a state that is not stress stretching out all the way to the horizon, okay? Now, this is difficult with a chronic stressor because you may not see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? I was talking with someone the other day who is dealing with a chronic health condition that is incurable, it's progressive, it's debilitating. They don't expect to find something unless something new gets offered or invented by medicine to be able to get out from under that stressor and the limitations that come with it. And so that's very clearly an obvious chronic stressor. And where is the end of the tunnel, right? That one's one that stretches out and you don't see where that could end or it could change to improve. And that's exactly the type of thing that our brain will then say, it stretches out to infinity. An infinite amount of stress is then way more overwhelming than even 100% of stress, right? So one of the arguments for practicing concrete thinking, and I'll describe how to do this later, so keep watching to the end of the video, but one of the arguments is if we are able to do something that will have the immediate effect of unhooking our brain from that pervasive stretching out to the horizon of the stress, then what we have done is we have changed infinity down to 99, down to 98, which, if you know math, infinity to 98 is an infinite gain, right? Another way to think about it is if I had one of those plastic bins like you put sweaters in and put under the bed, if I had something like that over my head where I can see through it, but it's over my head and it's tinted green, I might look around and I say, the whole universe is green, right? Now the reality is 100% of the thing is green and it's just around my head, therefore it's affecting all of my vision. But from my standpoint, looking out from inside of it, I'm saying, oh yeah, the whole thing is green, right? Now, obviously I can fix this by taking the thing off my head, which is, it's crazy that I've got the thing on my head in the first place, but bear with me here for the example. If you're standing next to me and you say, hey John, look, I'm going to fix this for you. And you take out like an X-Acto knife and you cut only, let's say, 1% of the plastic bin away. So you leave it on my head, it's still intact, but you're just cutting a little 1% slice out of it. Suddenly, I can see out through that 1%. And I can say, oh, yeah, I've got a plastic bin on my head. You know, the whole universe isn't green. I thought it was, but it's not, because I've got the 1% that's in contrast with the 99% that remains green, right? So as an analogy, if I'm going through my day and 100% of my day is pervaded by a particular stress, like taking care of parents who are getting progressively debilitated by dementia or something, or a health issue like I mentioned before, any type of chronic stressor, if it's pervasive and it's filled up 100% of my day, my brain will look out through that 100% and stretch it to infinity and say the whole universe is pervaded by that stress, right? Which is why I'm at infinity instead of 100, right? But how can I take that 1% out so that I can see through that slice and A, get some actual instrumental relief for a little bit of time, which is worth a lot, and I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But from a perceptual standpoint, so I can see something other than infinity. I can see that it's broken down to something less than 100%, which breaks it off of infinity and makes it more manageable and less overwhelming, right? So that's argument number one for why it's important to be able to do something like concrete thinking that gives that break so that I have that contrasting, non-stressed moment of perception that means I'm not stuck in 100% of the stress perception, okay? Number two, we need that break because if we go through our day, we wake up under some sort of stress load, these stressors pervade our perception and experience throughout the day, and we have them there with us when we go to bed at night. Pervasive stressors that don't have any breaks are stressors that load up on us more. And why do they load up on us more? Because they wear us out. You know this. You've had times where you were stressed in a prolonged way and you didn't get any breaks, you didn't get any relief, and we get a type of cognitive emotional fatigue from that, and then our performance starts to drop. And one important aspect of our performance is being able to cope with stress. So if stress is stress times time, it's also stress times time times fatigue, and the fatigue compounds the overall stress load, right? So if I'm awake for 10 hours on a particular day and I have a stress input of X, I have X times 10 for my stress load for that day. But if I become progressively more worn out mentally, emotionally from that unrelenting stress, and so fatigue is creeping up, that means each of those units of stress is dropping on me. It's not just 10. It's not just stress times 10. It's stress times 10 times that fatigue factor that causes me to get increasingly worn out by it, which means at the end of the day, my stress load is something greater than 10 because I've just gotten worn out, right? And so we need a break in order to get recovery from the increasing fatigue of unremitting stress so that the fatigue factor isn't going up and compounding our stress. So this is part of effective coping with chronic stressors. Now, this is less of an issue with quick stressors and medium stressors, right? But this is an important issue with chronic stressors because of this unremitting stress that causes fatigue, which causes an increase of the overall stress loading. And then, of course, the third angle would be just to say, subjectively, I don't want to feel miserable 100% of the time. I just don't. I don't want the tone of my experience to be misery. I need some neutral experience. I need some positive experience in my ongoing life. And so if I'm not able to take a break from a stressor that's causing me misery, then where's the neutrality? Where's the positivity? Okay? So here's a very powerful, reliable, quick technique to get the type of break that I've been describing. And if you watched part one of the concrete thinking, I mentioned counting backwards from a high number by an odd number. I mentioned naming what you're doing in the simplest, most neutral terms possible, right? And those are techniques that you can practice. But here's an additional one that some of the people that I have trained in this technique have found to be their preferred method. So you might like this one even better than the ones that I mentioned in part one. Okay, so with this one, you have your hand and you look at your open palm and you are present with seeing your open palm, right? You're in the present moment. You're not thinking about the past, the future. You're not thinking about your stress. You're just thinking, okay, here's my hand. And you say open because that's the state of your hand. Okay, open. And then you say closed. You do this. And then you say thumb, finger, 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 open. And we're back in position number one, okay? So for a short period of time, just a few rounds, 30 seconds to a minute of this, you're going to slowly and deliberately do that exercise with your hand. Open, closed, thumb, finger, 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 open, closed, thumb, finger, 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 open, closed, and so on, okay? Do it slowly, do it deliberately, do it with intention, and it will be more effective. And only a few cycles of that, if you're doing it very slowly and with a present-centered state of mind and very deliberate, it's going to unhook you from whatever stressor, whether it's a quick, medium, or chronic stressor. But if that glue that I mentioned in part one has caused your mental focus to lock into the stress trigger target and stay there so that that stress is pervading your experience, right, and you can't just easily will yourself to unhook from it, then introducing a technique like that that uses enough of your brain to say simple, neutral words that are present-centered, meaning in the here and now, right, that's going to provide that gentle break of the mental glue. And for the period of time that you're doing the exercise, it's going to provide you with some respite from that ongoing unremitting stress. But most importantly about the earlier thing that I mentioned is, even if you get just a little bit of a break, you have broken infinity down to something less than 100. So infinity down to 99 is a very, very advantageous perceptual shift to make, just like with the green tub over my head. Having a full green tub where the whole universe is green is a different experience from having a piece of it cut out and seeing that, oh yeah, the whole universe isn't green. Part of it's green, but part of it's not, and I can see that I've got a tub on my head, right? So try this out. It's going to have more of an effect that you're going to notice if you do it in a moment where your stress is more elevated, right? So like in the last video, I mentioned that when you are up at code orange and red, you're more likely to notice the effects of the concrete thinking exercise than if you do it at codes green or yellow, right? You're not going to hurt yourself. You just won't notice as much if you're not particularly elevated with the stress perception at the time of the practice. But try it out. If you find that it works or have comments about it, feel free to leave comments below. I'll try to respond to those. And again, as I said in the last video, if comments lead me to think that making another follow-up video would be helpful, I'll certainly do that. If you like this content, hit the like button. That helps YouTube learn who to show these videos to. And if you want, feel free to subscribe to the channel to be apprised of future uploads. Thanks.